Which is better, the Motorola Moto G5G 2023 or the Motorola Moto G5G 2022? Well, in this video, we're going to find out. What's going on, everyone? This is Kevin here, coming at you with my comparison of these two affordable Android smartphones from Motorola. Now, as the names of these phones do imply, the Moto G5G 2023 is the successor to last year's Moto G5G 2022. Now, what's especially interesting, going from one generation to the next, is that we actually got a very significant price reduction. So the Moto G5G 2023 retails for just $249 compared to $399 with the Moto G5G 2022. Now, since the Moto G5G 2022 was launched, this phone has gotten quite a few price reductions, and I'm certainly expecting the same for the Moto G5G 2023. So definitely take a look at the various links in the video description to see the most up-to-date pricing and availability for both of these phones. And in addition to that, I do recommend seeing what your favorite carrier is offering for these devices, as if you do go the carrier route, you typically will save a lot more money compared to buying the phones factory unlocked. Of course, you will be stuck with that carrier, but in exchange for that, you can save a lot of money. But it is pretty uncommon to find such a large price reduction going from one generation to the next generation. And in many ways, the Moto G5G 2023 is an upgrade from its predecessor, but there are a few compromises here and there that did allow them to give us this big price reduction. But you will see a little bit later on in the video though that we have gained some new features with this device. So in some ways, it certainly could be an upgrade for you if you do currently have a Moto G5G 2022. Now, as far as the displays go with these two devices, there are some similarities, but then also some differences. Now, both phones do feature very large 6.5-inch displays, so the same display size, and then both phones do feature IPS LCD displays. However, when it comes to the refresh rate, we got a faster refresh rate this time around with the Moto G5G 2023. So with this device, we have a 120Hz refresh rate, giving us a very smooth experience when navigating around the phone, which is really awesome, compared to 90Hz is the refresh rate with the Moto G5G 2022. Now, 90Hz in itself is an upgrade from the typical 60Hz we find with most lower-end smartphones, but of course, having 120Hz makes things even better here. Now, beyond that, both phones feature a PPI of 270, both devices also have a 20:9 aspect ratio, but we do have a slightly better screen-to-body ratio with the Moto G5G 2023 at 82.9% compared to 81.4% with the Moto G5G 2022. Both phones do have pretty much the same design here though, with a thicker bottom bezel and then a hole punch for the front-facing camera. Now, the front-facing cameras do feature a different megapixel count. With the Moto G5G 2023, we have an 8-megapixel front-facing camera compared to 13 megapixels as the front-facing camera for the predecessor here. But when looking at the two displays side by side, it does seem like with the Moto G5G 2023, things are a bit brighter here. So in general, I definitely prefer the display with the 2023 device, even beyond just having that better refresh rate. Now, when it comes to storage, there are some pretty major differences here, and I think that's partially why the Moto G5G 2023 is a bit more affordable. So with this device, we are getting 128 gigabytes of storage compared to 256 gigabytes of storage with the predecessor model. Now, if you do buy these phones through a carrier, I do believe that you are actually getting less internal storage, so keep that in mind. But definitely out of these two phones, if you are looking for the most amount of storage, you are going to have to go with the Moto G5G 2022. That's a lot of storage at 256 gigs, but honestly with 128 gigs, that's still a lot of storage in itself. Now, fortunately, both phones do feature microSD card expansion, so if you want to offload photos and videos, for example, to free up some internal space, you definitely do have that ability. Now, neither of these two phones have wireless charging, which is a bit disappointing. However, they do both have fingerprint sensors on the power button. So let's try it out first with the Moto G5G 2023. It's very fast and responsive. Let's try that one more time. So that works really well. And then let's try it with the Moto G5G 2022. Also very quick. We'll try that again. So definitely very reliable here as well. In addition to that, both of these phones do feature Face Unlock, so I do appreciate that we have multiple methods here for accessing these phones. Now, as far as the cameras go with these devices, there are some similarities, but then also some differences. So with the Moto G5G 2023, we have a dual camera setup with a 48 megapixel main camera and then a 2 megapixel macro camera for close-up images. And then with the Moto G5G 2022, we're getting a triple camera setup with a 50 megapixel main camera a 2 megapixel macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera to assist with portrait mode. But even though there is no dedicated depth sensing camera with the Moto G5G 2023, this phone still does offer portrait mode for both the front and rear cameras, which is the same with the predecessor device. Now here's how things look on the camera apps on both phones. So this is with the main rear cameras right now. Then from here, we can switch over to the macro cameras and get very close up and have things be in really good detail. So certainly a helpful feature there. We can also then head over to portrait mode to get those nice blurred out backgrounds. We even have the ability to pick the amount of blur, so you can have less blur or more blur depending on your preference. And then flipping around to the front facing cameras on both devices, you can take portrait selfies, and then you can also take standard selfies as well. So I do appreciate that we're getting a lot of different photo and video abilities with these two devices. And speaking of video, these two phones are limited at just 1080p for both the front and rear cameras for video recording. So if you are looking for a phone that can take video at 4K, then unfortunately you can't do that with either of these two. Now another major difference between these two phones is the amount of RAM that we're getting. So with the Moto G5G 2023, we are getting 4 gigabytes of RAM compared to 6 gigabytes of RAM with the Moto G5G 2022. And in addition to that, we're getting completely different processors. So with the Moto G5G 2023, we're getting the Qualcomm Snapdragon 480 Plus 5G processor, whereas with the Moto G5G 2022, we're getting the MediaTek Dimensity 700 5G processor. Now overall, both of those processors are very capable, and I think for most people, you will be happy with the performance that you'll be getting with either of these two devices. That being said though, if you're coming from a more premium smartphone, maybe this time around you want to save some money, but you're used to using a $1,000 smartphone that has a more top-of-the-line processor, then you're going to notice with either of these two phones that things are a bit on the slower side. But if you are someone who's looking for a smartphone for the more basic tasks, such as phone calls, text messages, going on social media here and there, browsing the web, doing some emails and things like that, I feel like both phones are going to be plenty fast and you will be happy. Now I did run a benchmark test using Geekbench 6, and here are the scores that I got for these two phones. So with the Moto G5G 2023, I got a single core score of 733 and a multi-core score of 1772. And then with the Moto G5G 2022, I got a single core score of 693 and a multi-core score of 1888. So you can see the scores here side by side. In some ways, one phone is better than the other and vice versa. So in general, I would say that performance is pretty much equal with these two phones. Now when it comes to battery capacity, both devices do feature very large 5,000 milliamp hour internal batteries. So you're gonna have no issues getting through an entire day, if not multiple days of usage with either device. And then when it comes to software, there are some differences. So with the Moto G5G 2023, we are getting Android 13 out of the box, but the Moto G5G 2022 is still stuck in Android 12. Now I have no idea if, when, or ever this phone will get Android 13 or even any newer versions of Android, but just know that if you are looking for a newer version of the software, you are at least getting that here with the 2023 model. Now overall, I am a big fan of Motorola's take on Android. They really don't change too much at all here, as you can see. They pretty much add in extra bonus features on top of stock Android, but they're not just changing things just for the sake of changing them. So if you are pretty familiar with using other Android phones, things should be pretty familiar here with either of these two devices. Now unfortunately, we're not getting NFC with either phone. So NFC is the technology used to do tap and pay with your device. So if you want to go to the grocery store, for example, and use your smartphone to pay, you cannot do that here with either phone. So that is very disappointing, as tap and pay has gotten really popular, especially within the last couple of years. So I know for me at least, that's a major inconvenience not having that feature, as that is something that I find myself using almost on a daily basis. Honestly, anytime that I actually leave my home, I do find myself at some point or another using tap and pay on my smartphone. So if you've never done that before, then maybe it's not quite as big of a deal. There's no NFC with either phone, but just know that it's not present here. Now, a nice upgrade with the Moto G5G 2023 is that with this phone, we are getting stereo audio. So we're getting audio coming out of both the main speaker and earpiece as well when doing things like watching videos, playing games, or listening to music. Whereas with the predecessor model, we're only getting audio coming out of the main speaker on the bottom here. Now, fortunately, this device does still have very good audio quality. It's just not as good or immersive as what you're getting with the 2023 device. But taking a closer look at the hardware of these two phones, in many ways they're similar, but also in some ways they are different. Now both phones are made of plastic, besides the displays, which are made of glass, and you can see that with the Moto G 5G 2023, it's a little bit boxier compared to its predecessor. But what I do appreciate is that with both phones, we do have a more matte finish on the back here, so you really can't see any fingerprints at all. So that's definitely the way to go compared to having a glossy back. So I'm glad that Motorola has continued this with the latest generation of this device. But on the left side of the two phones, we just have the slot for the microSD card and SIM card. Then on the right side, we have volume up, volume down, and then also the power buttons, which doubles the fingerprint sensors. Then up top here, on both phones, we have the noise canceling microphones. And then on the bottom, we have the 3.5mm headphone jack, microphone, USB-C port for charging and data transfer, and the speaker. And then, taking a look at the back of the two phones, we have a little bit of a different design for the camera module, but other than that, we just have the Motorola logo, and that's it. So in conclusion, I don't really feel like if you have a Moto G 5G 2022, you should be upgrading to the Moto G 5G 2023. We're not getting really that many new features here with this device. It is nice that we are getting stereo audio, but beyond that and the higher refresh rate for the display, there really aren't any additional benefits with going with this phone. Really, the biggest innovation here is that we're getting a very large price decrease. So I'm glad to see that, but otherwise, it's not really an upgrade. That being said though, if you are in the market to buy either of these two phones and you're considering one over the other, I think price is probably the biggest reason why you'd make your choice. So, for example, you might end up going to a carrier and finding that both phones are being offered at the same price. Maybe both are offered at a very large discount compared to the MSRP, or maybe you'll find that the 2023 model of the phone is in fact a lot cheaper, even with a carrier, then it might be more worth it to go for this device. Whereas maybe the Moto G 5G 2022 is really on sale, then maybe this phone makes more sense. So I would say in many ways it's a tie between the two phones, but it really comes down to what different offers are available for these devices. But hopefully this video helped kind of clear up the differences and similarities between these two phones. If you liked it, give the video a thumbs up. But this is Kevin here, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care and have a great rest of your day.